Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninja speaking. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Bootleg Breakdown series, where this time around we have another big boy to review here. Dragon Ball Super's Broly, as presented to us by Legend Creation. For those keeping score at home, I have not been able to recommend any Legend Creation figures as of late, on account that the vast majority tend to be, for lack of a better term, poorly recasted versions of the original figures that are filled with cheap imitation joints that aren't even good for spare parts. Hopefully Broly can break that trend a bit. Getting this rather large lad out of the packaging, presentation wise, I'll be quite frank, just from a glancing view, he's not too bad for the most part, generally sharing much of the same kind of finish you might expect out of an official Figuarts figure. However, once you start looking in, and it doesn't take long, you can see that this does suffer from some of the same problems you see with just about every Legend Creation figure out there, namely missing articulation joints. Namely, the butterfly joints are completely absent in this case, and that inclination on that line there is really just casted into the material. What that means is that Broly will not have his full range of motion there. You can get kind of a basic rotation out of his shoulders. His upper arms are limited in motion, but actually, as it turns out, that'll be the same on the real figure itself. Admittedly, what I'm surprised about the shoulder pads is that they do actually have the correct amount of motion there. I wish I could say the same about the upper body though. While the real Broly doesn't have exactly the best upper body movement, it's a little more present than what this bootleg has, and that's because the upper body casting, which is also simplified, is slightly smaller than what it should be to really move on this figure properly. Now, going back to the arms itself, as you can see, there is a limited kind of motion on there just because his arms can only go so far back, and his arms can, well, kind of his forearms can only twist so much, which, like I mentioned, is kind of expected with the real figure. And in terms of his knees there and his hips, yeah, it's hard to tell right now, but those hips are not really moving too well, and that's because the cape is actually incredibly stiff on this figure. The front part almost has no give to it whatsoever. It's cast out of material that's too hard compared to something like the full power Broly, which has a much softer cape, so you can't really get him to kick too much. And there's something going on with his hips that won't allow him to spread properly. I'm going to have to investigate that later once I separate the toy properly. Going into his knees themselves though, you can kind of see they do have the right amount of range. They're a little stiff on this figure, but it's better to be a little stiff than being completely floppy, so that's not a huge problem. And a quick cut to his ankles and toes, you can kind of see the ankles are a bit looser than they should be. I prefer them to be a little bit tighter and stick out of the body a bit more than they should, and the toe joints don't move at all, they're completely stuck. Which is not a huge surprise because that tends to be a very common problem with Legend Creation bootlegs, and most in general. So, with that in mind, let's give a direct comparison to the real Super Broly in this case, which, as you can see, is standing a bit taller than the bootleg one here. So yes, we have another issue of the bootleg being undersized. For those looking for a direct side comparison here, the bootleg itself stands at about 6 3/4 inches, which, as you can see, is a little smaller than the real ones. I'm going to roughly say off the top of my head 7-ish inches, depending on the haircut in this case. However, I do want to take the opportunity to correct myself about one thing I said earlier about the hips and the skirt in this case. I kind of forgot at the time that the skirt on the real one isn't exactly the softest one either. For some reason, they're both stiffer than the full power Broly ones. And in terms of the hips, they seem to actually have a pretty similar joint system that's kind of akin to 1.0 joints. So in that respect, the bootleg actually is pretty much on par. However, that doesn't exactly change the fact that the butterfly joint system is completely missing, as opposed to on the real one here, where it's present, although a bit stiff on mine because I really haven't toyed with this figure much. Moving onward to accessories, as it might be easy to tell here, there is a definite difference between the quality of the bootleg versus the real one. Namely, the bootleg heads do tend to have a slightly more satiny finish, on top of just the faces as well as the hair, and while the peg openings are about the same, to be quite frank, yeah, they're not going to exactly be mistaking the fake and real heads, especially the Super Saiyan one. Yeah, the hair is not only slightly scrunched up, it's also much lower in quality. It's very noticeable even compared to the normal heads. Or yeah, you're missing a lot of detail, you got a glossy finish because it's unpainted plastic, it doesn't look great, and the faces are honestly a little bit so-so. Inhibitor ring is about the same, but slightly out of scale because it's made for the smaller figure, and slight casting issues on the bootleg one. So yeah, it's not going to quite fit on the real one, just for note on that one. Moving on to the hands though, admittedly, other than being softer in focus and slightly glossier I find on the bootlegs, they're actually not half bad. So if you did need some replacement hands for some reason, you probably could take them off the bootleg one without too much hassle because the peg openings are even about the same here. So as you can kind of see, all hands are accounted for, although the focus on the bootlegs, like I said, are softer than expected. To preemptively answer a question that I know is going to pop up in the comments later, hypothetically, yes, you can use the bootleg faces on the real heads in this case. Namely because the bootleg faces are slightly smaller than the real deal, however, there is going to be a little bit of wiggle room going on there, because the top bit is going to be a bit smaller than expected, but it will work, so hypothetically you can take the bootleg faces and repaint them so you have some different expressions for the full-size Brawly. However, if you're looking to use the real faces on the bootleg heads, that is not going to work, however, as the real faces are slightly too large to really fit in the peg openings without warping the faces themselves, and why would you want to do that? To answer another preemptive question that's probably going to come up, yes, if you hypothetically did need to really replace the wrist pegs on real Brawly, the bootleg one should suffice well enough for the job. As you can see, they are roughly about the same size. Bootleg is on the left, real one is on the right. So yes, they will be able to accommodate each other with maybe a little bit of cleanup work in order to get them fit, but it's possible. Neck peg, on the other hand, will need a little more work, as the bootleg one is slightly undersized, so you'll need to coat it with something. And for the last bit, for the stuff I didn't show earlier, here's bootleg Brawly with his little necklace bit on here, the little shock collar, and Brawly with the other hands that I didn't already show in the video. As you can see, the wrist ones kind of stick out as always, that's what they do on these bootlegs, but generally speaking they tend to fit on pretty well with a little snug fit if anything. The heads are a little bit loose, but generally they fit well enough on the body though. You might want to put a little extra coat of super glue or something, flip for her, your choice, in order to tighten the neck joint a bit though. That is what I will say on the matter. As we get down to the teardown portion of this video, I'm going to be entirely frank, folks. I'm caught a little off guard on this one because, aside from some obvious issues that are just inherent to Legend Creation, like the absolute simplification of the torso here, which removes the butterfly joints, Brawly actually isn't half bad for what he is, especially considering he's half price what the real one should be. We have a lot of the real joints, or at least very similar ones, compared to what the real one should have, maybe undersized and with a few issues like these hip joints that honestly are stiff as hell and don't want to move. I actually had to put quite a bit of force in order to get them to move for this video bit here. But otherwise, everything is kind of matching up as it should be. We look at the arms themselves, let's look at the separate them for a better example. The construction of the arms are about what you expect to see in the real one, even down to the limitations, namely the fact that you can't rotate the arm the whole way. And that's because it's built that way, and frankly matches up the movement you get on the real figure too, so I can't really complain about that. If it wasn't for the fact that the paint was a little lighter in terms of its shading compared to the real one, mine is actually a little too heavy-handed, you'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference. Same with the legs. Maybe some casting issues here and there, maybe it sticks out a little more in the knee, but frankly it works as it's supposed to. Maybe the ankle joints stick out a little more than they should, but that's kind of a minor nitpick. The only really major nitpick is that the toes don't move. That is kind of a bit of an issue there. But all in all, Brawly lucks out yet again. It's actually not half bad, especially considering the price. I think that's all I need to say about this particular bootleg, but one more obligatory thing. Thanks for watching, folks.